Animation? Okay, so animation is really simple for Maya. You have this time slider at the bottom, right? So you notice it's by default you go from 1 to 120. And the way that this works is very similar to other animation software. You're going to have keyframes. So in Maya, everything is keyframeable. So if I go over to this side, I could keyframe all of these attributes or just one of them. So if I wanted to say keyframe this movement here to this movement over here, I would first make sure my number slider is on the frame I want. So I'm going to put it at 1. And then if you hit S on the keyboard, you're going to basically save that keyframe. All of this is then going to turn red, and that means that we saved all of those values, right? So then I'm going to move my keyframe to, let's say, 60. I'm then going to move or transform my object. I'm then going to rotate my object maybe. Maybe I'll scale it. And then I'm going to hit S here. So now it's going to basically create a blend or a transformation between both, right? The attribute menu. If you don't have your attribute editor, it's going to be this icon. I think it's this icon here. Yeah, show hide attribute editor. So once you do that, if you press play, it's going to basically play your animation, right? I can add another keyframe. So let's say I want to add another keyframe, but maybe I don't want to move the whole thing. Maybe I just want to change one value. So,
Professor,
yes.
I click the object, then I click S. Now I have to.
So so the steps are like first you move it to the frame that you want, the keyframe. So I'm going to move it to 120. Then you're going to select your object, if you didn't already. Then you're going to move it, and then you're going to hit S on the keyboard.
For the second.
Yeah. Well, you only do it once, but.
So
it'll go through that animation, right?
You can export that.
You can export
like a video.
You can render it out as a video. You can export it as an FBX and import it into something like Unity, or you can run it as a animation, a video game engine. Which, if we do AR and VR or projection mapping, that's probably what we'll end up doing. Projection mapping will probably do video. Animation for AR for sure. So it's kind of tricky when you're working like this. If you wanted to go back, say, like at one point, you can always go back to this frame, and let's say we want to change the rotation here and make this 190. So I can either hit S and it'll resave everything, right? So now it just modified my animation, right? Or let's say if I just want to change this one value, I could change that value. I could right click and do set key, right? So I can save one key, or I could basically save the whole thing. Does that make sense? Like all of these values, like for example this one, if I say here I want this to be 90, so it rotates, and I'd say it's scaled up to like 2, 2, 2. If I always want to save these keys, so I could say right click set key, right click set key, right click set key. So you notice that these are all set at 2, right? So I can move this back. Sorry, I can move the time slider back, and I could then say, okay, here I want this to be 1, 1, and 1. So if I save these keys again, then my animation will only save for those values, right? Does that make sense?
How do you save it? Just press S.
So if you want to save everything about the object, then you would just hit S. If you want to save, like as for example this one where I'm just changing the scale, you're going to right click on the attribute that you want and hit set key. Okay. Yes. Cube. So if you go create polygon primitive cube, go ahead and So something we didn't go over yet, if you go to edit mesh, add divisions, and just change the divisions to, let's say, like 15. Or maybe that might be a lot. Try like 3, right? And then just use soft selection to create a complex form.
You created a mesh.
I just created a cube. I added divisions, and then I did the soft selection. And I'm going against my own rule, saying not to work in 3.
Where's the gumball?
Press W on your keyboard.
There we go.
Were you able to do that one? So
more or less.
create polygon primitive cube.
Yeah, that I got. Have a little shape.
Okay, and then you're going to go to mesh, edit mesh, add divisions, and then just change the divisions to 3, and enter. So the reason why you're doing that is because when you do soft selection is based off of, you need to have a high resolution to actually affect the whole form in a way that you want. The lower the resolution, the less it's going to respond in a smooth way. So then you can just start to modify this.
Did you right click to enter that 3 or?
To press 3 on to get the soft selection?
Yeah.
The soft selection is B on the keyboard. And then if you press B, hold B, and then the middle mouse button, you can change the fall off radius. Any other questions at this point? So for example, let's say if I wanted to combine these two, right? I could easily do that. Do you guys remember how? How would I combine? Mesh what? Mesh combine. So they're both green. And now an important thing when you're bridging, you have to make sure that you're selecting the same number of faces, right? So if I want to bridge, if I want to combine these two, I have to make sure I select like the same number of faces on one as the other. So if I select 4 over here, I have to make sure I select 4 over here. And then what I'm going to do is edit mesh bridge, right? And then if I up the divisions, and then I can switch this from linear to blend, right? I can start to taper or twist, right? Yes.
What does updating the divisions do?
It gives you a smoother resolution. So basically, the more divisions you have, the more like refined your geometry will be, but the harder it's going to be to work with, right? So for example, if I wanted to change all these faces, right, I have to select every single one of them. So you really don't want to add divisions until the very end. You don't want to add edges. You want to work with the least amount of geometry possible in order to get done what you need to get done. So typically, you would never add divisions to an object. You would do this workflow, which I have this recorded, so you can go back and watch it. But it's always working with very low poly objects, and then slowly refining them, right, until you get the form that you want to work in a very controlled way. Are you guys able